Well, Unite Round. This year with proper planning time, activations, scheduling, locations and derbies. It was always going to be the litmus test we needed to see what a properly functioning Unite Round would look like and allow us to properly answer the question of what comes next. The people who were there all seemed to have a great time, but seemingly, as always, the quantity of those experiencing Unite Round in the flesh was the unfortunate low point, apart from the Sydney Derby, which will always draw a big crowd. You could argue it was a success purely because it fulfilled its purpose of providing an escape out of the disastrous decision to sell the grand final to Destination New South Wales. But that contract, we understand, has now expired. So, what do we do now? We'll chat to Sydney FC's Jaiden Kucharski about his cruelly disallowed derby goal, a look ahead to the Sky Blues matchup in the AFC Champions League 2, and about the future of Unite Round before we dissect it all ourselves on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight is Christian Montegan. Christian, I guess my question is, what did Unite Round look like on the couch?
Look, great from the outset. It was obviously some entertaining games. You touched on sort of the low crowd numbers from that perspective. You know, the product wasn't that great, to be honest, which we'll get into a bit later. But overall, I thought, yeah, there were quality games. And I saw some of the vision on social media, the fan interactions, all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure you guys can touch on a bit more. So overall, I think it was definitely a good experience, especially those who were there.
I was kicking myself yesterday, being Sunday afternoon, sitting at the airport, well, evening actually, and I was thinking back to the last podcast, Jacob Stevens, and I said, we'll see on Tuesday as long as all the planes are working fine and we get home and there's no issues. So, of course, my plane had an engineering issue. I think it was an oil leak. We got delayed by a few hours. We got moved to a different plane. Thankfully, got home on the Sunday night a little bit later than expected. But you actually got away before me, so yeah. I hope you got a good night's sleep.
Well, it was quite funny because my flight was supposed to take off an hour after yours was scheduled for, and then you end up calling me and going, flight's been delayed. So I ended up taking off earlier than you. But no, I mean, I got a night's sleep. It wasn't fantastic. Obviously, I didn't get back home until about 11, 11:15, and then had to wake up to go to work today. But the things we do for the love of football, hey. And I'm just glad mine wasn't delayed anymore, because I would be running off of about as much sleep as I had on the Friday before the five-a-side game.
Not only was my flight delayed, but I got a text in the morning saying that for some reason my flight had been overbooked. So they very generously granted me the opportunity to transfer onto an earlier flight for free.
And then that was still delayed.
And then that got delayed longer than the initial flight that probably would have left earlier.
Disaster.
So, that's I guess that happens sometimes. Let's get stuck into the football. We're going to kick things off with the Sydney Derby, it being the marquee point of Unite Round, and just talk about that game in isolation for a little bit, because it has its own storylines running through it. And I tell you what, being my first opportunity to experience a Sydney Derby in the flesh for the first time, it was so good, Jacob, just to be at a game of football, so many people in the stands, both active ends, big in numbers going at each other. It created an extraordinary atmosphere. It was just really a pleasure to be there.
Yeah, it was awesome to experience for the first time. And I mean, I was in the stands for the Adelaide Brisbane game, and we knew when the RBB had gotten close, because all of a sudden we see people start to leave and head towards the gate at that end of the stadium, and you can just hear the noise getting louder and louder and louder as they approach. So that was a pretty cool experience to witness this, it just growing like a crescendo as they walk into the stadium. It was pretty awesome. And then the atmosphere throughout the match was just incredible as well. And I think it goes to show what a well-designed stadium can do to the atmosphere and the sound there as well, because it wasn't just that game, but even when you look at like the Wellington victory game, right, there were not a huge crowd there, but the noise nobody was there, but the noise they were making was still great, because the way that the stadium's designed, it just bounces the noise straight back into the stadium, back onto the pitch, and it makes it sound like the 20 that are there are 40, 50, 60 strong. That helps. But the scenes there on Saturday night for that game were pretty incredible. And I've never seen anything quite like it at the football, to be honest, because it's only really this game that gets that, and obviously first time and first chance to witness it, and I can see why there's so much hype around this fixture because it was awesome.
Yeah, it was a really great event. And Christian, we had such a big conversation during the week about the golfing trip, and more so in general about the responsibility of the players to hype up the derby and kind of provide that facade that derbies live and breathe on. And to be fair to them, we asked for a little bit of theatre and they gave it to us. They were going in full in on each other. I particularly loved the moment of Brandon Borello ushering over Douglas Costa to get a little cuff going. Obviously, the celebration, his little crying one, obviously it's going to be thrown back at you, but that's what we need, right? It's those kind of things that make this derby what it is, and they gave it to us.
Yeah, on the Brandon Borello celebration, I saw a tweet from Joey Lynch saying, this is what we want, right? We just want players to express, how they're feeling in the moment, because that's what we want as fans. At the end of the day, it just sort of brings out, what we love about football. It was just such great theatre about it. And especially that first half in particular, you could tell both sides wanted to put sort of this golf situation to the side, and the tackles were just sort of flying in. It was fiery, it was intense. And you can just tell right from the get-go that, this is going to be a real derby, as it always is in this fixture anyway. So, from that perspective, it was, obviously, very fiery, a lot of tackles, but the quality was there as well, right? I think Sydney, again, as like the opening fixture of the season, Sydney probably showed that bit more quality and talent, shining through. But I thought towards the latter stages, the Wanderers slowly started to get back into it. And then, once Juan Mata made that appearance, I thought he definitely helped the side, try and get back into it. And obviously the assist as well, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about him and that decision to sort of bench him again. But no, I thought in the end, Sydney obviously just deserved the victory, just based off the general play, the talent in the end, the final third. You can just tell it just showed once again.
I loved the storyline throughout the match. We've got Joe Lawley scoring in the first half, doing the golf swing celebration. Yeah. Then we have Jordan Courtney-Perkins scoring. Marcus Antonsen comes on and scores. Matta didn't get a goal, but played the assist to Antonsen. So a goal and assist for all the golfers that were involved. I'd sent this tweet out at the time, but I would have loved to see the camera pan to Luke Bratton just sitting in the crowd, just watching on or something. That would have added to it as well. But I mean, it's just part of the storylines, and we want things to talk about, and it's given it to us. So props to them. It was a spectacular game. I think now's a good time to head over to Jaiden Kucharski. He was kind enough to give us a little bit of his time earlier, and I caught up with him here. Well, we're joined now by Jaiden Kucharski from Sydney FC. Jaiden, thank you for your time today, and congratulations on the derby win on Saturday night.
Cheers, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was good. Good to get the win, so happy with that.
During the week, of course, there was a lot of chat about, a round of golf that a couple of your teammates participated in. Obviously, that's been talked about plenty, but just, was there anything behind the scenes that was talked about, maybe your skipper, Ryan Grant or Ufuk Talay, about the players' contribution to what makes a derby and the spite behind it? Because it felt, at least standing on the sidelines, like a particularly fiery one.
Yeah, not so much. I think everyone knows what a derby means to everyone, the fans, the players, the staff, the club. It's a big game all around the world. It's supposed to be big, tough. You're not meant to be mates on the field. All the stuff that happens during the week, like we're still human at the end of the day. Like if stuff happens during the week, we didn't really hear much. But when it comes down to training and prepping for the game, we took nothing aside. We put everything on the line. Hadn't had the best run of games. I think we've had obviously 1-2 in the league and then 2 losses as well, and then had one in the Champions League. So I think the main aspect was trying to get back on winning terms so then we can build a strong closing gap.
And how do you find managing the difference between the A-League and obviously you're playing in that AFC Champions League too as well? Like, do you feel like those competitions are separate in terms of form, or is it just game by game?
I think it does. It plays a bit of both, I suppose. Like if you're playing well week in, week out, it doesn't really matter who you play or what competition you play in because you're building that form back to back. If you play a harder game on the weekend and then an easy game during the week, maybe in the Champions League or an A-League game, maybe that plays so, but you're meant to take every opposition as to be a hard game and give enough respect, but not enough respect where you're going to go out and easy into a game. So I wouldn't say we take every game, we analyze every team, and we know we've played everyone once now. So this is the second round playing the Champions League, so we know what we expect and we know what the result we need.
What's your travel itinerary looking like? Because I'm sure it's quite a busy time.
Yeah, I think we're leaving tomorrow morning sometime, and then we arrive late afternoon in Hong Kong, and then we'll have a training session on Wednesday, and then have a game on Thursday, and probably fly back Friday. And luckily, we got the bye in the league this weekend, so we can prep. And then I think we have KR next Thursday again, so it'll be a 7-day turnaround, so it'll be okay to deal with.
What's the difference in taking on a team like Eastern home and away? Because obviously the conditions can be vastly different. You've got a little bit of a look at them, so you know what their players might be like. But is it significantly different home and away?
Not so much the playing opposition. Obviously, they play similar. They might set up differently. We did beat them in the first game, so they might change tactics or they might double down and go again with like how they played. But I think it depends. Like I know it was a very hard game for the boys that we played in Manila compared to the game that we played 2 weeks earlier against I think KR at home. Was we had okay weather in Sydney, and then we went over there and it was 90 to 100% humid, sweating, artificial ground. So you got to take those things into account. We got the job done, but it's much harder on the body. So I think we just got to prepare for that.
Bringing it back to the A-League, obviously the derby played in Unite round. The fact that you had one in round 1 and then round 5 is unique in itself. Firstly, how do you feel about having those games packed so close together?
I like it. I think going with the NRL, they do Magic Round every year. They get so many fans in, and it's a good way to bring all the cultures and all the teams together. And if it's happening in Sydney, it's great for us. Some of the boys get to travel a bit more as well, stay in Sydney. And I think it's just good for the fans, a lot for the kids. I didn't know that they were going to do stalls and all the pop-up grounds and all the jersey trading and stuff outside. I think that's a great idea to bring more fans in that are more football fanatics, maybe not so much A-League fanatics, but maybe they bring them in and we can build the league off that.
Do you think, like, obviously the Sydney Derby is always going to draw a big crowd, right? You had, I think the official number was just a touch over 30,000 on Saturday night. Do you feel a little bit shielded maybe from some of the issues because the other days didn't quite get maybe the numbers we would have hoped for?
Maybe so. Like, obviously some games bring in more. Obviously, if you had the New Zealand boys come down, they get some fans that travel. But again, like it's our home game for the Sydney teams, but there's less that they can do travelling. But maybe an idea is that we move every year. So maybe we go to Melbourne one year and there's more Melbourne supporters where the Sydney-based teams get to travel, or we go interstate. But we can really explore that and kind of change up the Unite rounds, because if we're going to be united, we can change venues and everyone's going to be a part of it.
Does it bother you, like, as a football person? Because a lot of traditional football people, you'd say a league in football is you play one game home, one game away. Obviously, in the A-League, we've kind of always had this compromised fixture where we're playing, 3 times per season sometimes, and 2 teams 3 times here, and then we have this Unite round that it's neutral. Does it bother you in that way?
Not so much. Like you can say, but there'd be excuses at the end of the day, right? You might play derby, but you might play, say, a weaker team that year. Maybe you might only play them twice, home and away. So maybe you get an advantage. You might play, say, Wanderers are supposed to have 2 away games. The Unite round fell in once, and now we have 2 home games technically. We might go to Victory, might have 2 away games, we might have 2 home games. So it kind of just depends. Like it's better. I feel better as a footballer maybe to have 1 home game, but 1 away game. But I've never had that ever. Only in the NPL I've had that. But when you come to the A-League, you can't make excuses for yourself. The league's set up how it is, and if you're going to play in the league, you got to be ready for anything.
You've kind of got a bit of a reputation now as this guy that comes off the bench and scores late goals in big matches. You've already done it against Brisbane, had one cruelly denied on Saturday night, of course, the derby last year as well. Did you feel a bit hard done by, considering how far they went back to find that foul?
Yes, I do. I think too much protest on the field for the referees. I thought maybe we could stick with an on-field decision. The liner was there. The referee made a decision. But that's being picky, really. Like the referees do their job. They're here to serve the league as they are and keep control. And if they make a decision, then we just got to back it. Luckily, we had come away with a 4-2 win. Unfortunate for myself, I thought it was quite nice build-up from the boys.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the referees make a decision. We come away with a win.
Obviously, Sydney have had quite the import list of quality, especially in the final third this year. We're talking Anas Wahim, Patrick Lamar, and Douglas Costa as well. What is it like, firstly, even just having that kind of quality of training and being around them all the time?
Yeah, it's great. Like every season we bring in someone. Like my first year, we had Robert Mack and Joe Lolly in there, and the likes of Jack Rodwell as well. Like they're big stars that have done really well throughout their careers. And now to bring in Douglas Costa, like I remember watching him growing up as a young fella, bloody playing FIFA with him. Like crazy. Now I can call him one of my teammates, closely becoming a mate. So it's unreal. And then Anas is really molded into the team very well. Leo doesn't speak much English, but like just the bond that we can create just through banter and being teammates it's unreal, and nothing you can really describe really unless being a footballer. So it's great having them at training. The quality is so high. They've played at the biggest levels and they're bringing their quality here. So it just makes myself want to perform better for them at training and then improve my career itself.
What is the conflict like? Because obviously more competition into the team is good because it's going to raise your overall quality. But for you personally, it's going to mean more competition for minutes as well.
Yeah, 100%. But anywhere you go, like it doesn't matter who comes in. If you're a young player, if you're an old player coming in, it's based on performance and how you play. And these players brought in to win games and they've been doing so. So I have to keep training hard, putting in. When I come on, I try and score and do my best. And there's rotation. Last couple of games we had Joe Lolly and Douglas out, so we had to rotate the team a bit. And the boys did well who come in. So maybe if I get my chance, and then I hope to do the same.
Are you in a position of your career where maybe a loan move away for 6 months to get regular first team minutes is important to you, or is training around that quality the higher priority?
I think you can say you can go both ways really. Like I'm enjoying my time at Sydney. Like I've been here for 2 years. I'd like to finish on good terms and finish out the season. We've already played, I think, 10 games or so far, and obviously the training's unreal, good caliber. The staff are great. They put on great sessions. So and maybe I could go away somewhere and play minutes, but I don't know who's at best interest at the end of the day. I'm happy where I am currently. Obviously, I'd like more playing minutes, but that comes down to the coach, and I just got to keep training hard and see where things play.
All right, Jaden, we thank you very much for your time and good luck in Hong Kong this week.
All good. Thank you for having me on. Cheers.
All right, so Jacob, apparently not a whole lot of conversation behind closed doors, but it's clear from like the lolly conversation, the lolly celebration, right? It had to have been on their minds a little bit, right? They wanted to put on a bit of a show.
Yeah, well, like that's the thing, right? Is that when you're playing football, you're playing it and training with these guys, and you know each other, and that's especially the case in somewhere like Australia where the professional football scene is so small. You're going to know these guys, and you're going to be friendly with them even if they are your rivals. And Jaden said that stuff happens off the pitch. Like that's just the reality of it. Everyone's got lives that they deal with, but it's how you then can almost sort of that cognitive dissonance, right, of being able to turn it off and just go into the game completely fresh. And that's that lolly celebration shows that, right, of like you can poke a bit of fun at it and use it as fuel and fire in the first place. And look, it does suck still, I think, for the fans that it happened in the first place, but then the fact that the players turned it on its head, right, and really used it to sort of fuel what was happening on the pitch. And obviously the lolly celebration, the pure coincidence of the fact that almost everybody that was involved with golf got involved with the goals in the game as well, just added to it. But it's like without that golfing thing, it wouldn't have, what celebration would Lolly have done that would have, invoked such feeling, and stuff like that. So while it sucks in the moment, to then be able to flip it on its head and use it to sort of continue to push the derby mentality, I thought was really cool. And I mean, look, Jaden here is he's got that player's perspective of it, right? Like we don't have that as fans or as media or as, whoever. We can't quite understand how it is for these players. So, sure, it doesn't look great, but like I said, the fact that they're able to then turn it around and actually use it as a little bit of a gotcha moment in the derby is pretty cool as well. And yeah, I mean, they go, oh, we don't really think about it, but yeah, you're right, Lucky. They definitely were thinking about it, because there's no way that wasn't a premeditated thing from Joe Lolly there. He's like, if I score tonight, I'm doing it. like that's not something you come up with just in those circumstances. So I mean, it does help as well that the media has just been talking about it incessantly. The fans have been talking about it constantly in the build up as well, so it is going to be on the players' minds. It doesn't matter how much you try and shut that stuff out, it's still going to get to you eventually. And I think that sort of showed that is the case. And I guess maybe that's going to inflate fans' egos a little bit, and go, look, we're so important that they're listening to us even when they say they're not. But yeah, I mean, I just enjoyed seeing it, because I thought it was a great moment, and we were all having a good laugh up in the press box when we saw it happen as well. Which we were all like, wait, was that a golf swing you just did? And a pretty awesome celebration, all things considered.
Yeah, I had to go back and track the Instagram post to get like a list, just to make sure I was like watching all the players just to see what they were doing. Look, yeah, it's probably is a difference between the players being aware of it and like using it as specific motivation in terms of like the team talk or something, right? But I'm sure it was in the back of their heads. But Sydney, I thought Christian played some really good football as well. Joe Lolly and Douglas Costa, having them both in the starting 11. Of course, Costa went off at half time, but just the fluidity of what they played with on Saturday night, I feel like we hadn't seen that since both of those players were in the team in those first couple of rounds. So to have them both in and rotating around, and the little tricks in the back heels, the Yoga Benito specifically, Leo Senna and Douglas Costa together, that link up was incredible. And just to see them play such free flowing football doesn't really get seen so often in the A-League like that.
Yeah, you're right. We probably tipped, this rough patch to end once Lolly and Douglas Costa, re-enter the lineup, because the past few weeks they really sort of have been struggling for that fluidity. I think in that final third, and you saw when they've got their full strength side in, you can just tell it's just free flowing football, attacking, exciting. The transitioning, just the flowing movement, it just really good to watch. And I thought once again the Wanderers sort of a bit flustered at times defensively, not knowing who to pick up, the man marking, they were just a bit all over the place on occasions. And we know the frailties in the defence of the Wanderers, and Sydney, like I said before, the quality on show just really shone through in the end. And hopefully, for the rest of the season, Costa can maintain that fitness and really play most games, because we don't hope to see this sort of this stop-start with sort of fitness issues. Joe Lolly's been okay in the past couple of seasons he's been there. It's sort of been of late he's picked up a couple of niggles, but yeah, once they've got their full strength side, it's really difficult to see anyone stopping them.
And then what are the Wanderers, Jacob? I thought they actually came out with a decent game plan, and when Sydney had the ball, specifically off goal kicks, they would man mark. They would, really put the onus on Sydney to do something special to get it out of their own half. A lot of the time, that just forced balls long over the top, which they were able to recover. So that worked, and they were in the game for a long period. Obviously, the game blew out towards the end, and the disallowed goal to Kucharski, as we mentioned. Do you see this as an improvement from the Wanderers?
I thought that there were moments where they looked really good. One of the things I liked that they were doing was with their goal kicks and their distributions from deep. Yes, they were going quick as well. That was the main thing. And that's because Sydney all season long, that they've been in possession. Christian, you mentioned, really fluid, right? And that's what they've looked to do. They've had these sort of relationist principles in possession where it's not based on your position. It's based upon the pass that you're trying to make or the space that you can find, right? There's a little bit more freedom there to move around. But what that does is, if you're then not drilled properly defensively, is just leaves a lot of space open. And that's where the Wanderers goal came from, the Zach Sapswood goal, right? Because there were, 8 or 9 Sydney FC players in the attacking third. I don't care what team in the world you are, that's not a recipe for success in transition defensively. And yeah, the Wanderers play it quick, play it long, get in behind, score a goal. And that's clearly how they approached the game and how they wanted to break apart Sydney. I think the issue was that they just weren't good defensively enough either to be able to withstand the Sydney pressure so constantly throughout the game. So, look, it was the first half, I thought in particular, was a good showing from the Wanderers. And then in the second half, it just fell a little bit flat for them. They couldn't quite get anything going in possession. They were harried a little bit quicker by Sydney. The press was perhaps a little bit more intense in that second half from the Sky Blues, and it sort of caught them off guard a touch. And then, they struggled from that. And once you concede a goal or two, heads drop, especially in a derby match. And it doesn't matter how great the atmosphere is when you're a couple of goals behind. It does fall a bit flat, and it can be hard to fight back from. So, look, I think the first half, was a good showing, but I think in the second half, it showed some of their weaknesses. It showed perhaps a little bit of the issue of mentality that they might have there, because they weren't able to continue to fight back. And look, obviously, it wasn't. Look, I do still think that the Wanderers played okay. It wasn't completely awful, and I know that's not what the fans thought. Obviously, the RBB after the game pretty viciously calling them out, and the capo ripping into the players after the match. But fans are going to be like that. They're fickle. But I do think that there were elements in there that showed what the Wanderers can do, and who they can be. But just not consistently good enough. And a pretty well earned result for Sydney over the Wanderers there, I reckon.
Well, him didn't even start in this game as well. It's one thing to keep in mind. So, it just shows their depth and, ability to, rest a couple of these players. Whereas the Wanderers, is their depth, really up to par this season to challenge the likes of Sydney? It's a big question mark.
And then, Christian, there's the perpetual storyline of Juan Mata and what to do with him. Alan Stajic came out with some quite strong comments in the post-match press conference talking about Fahid Ben Khalfallah and his comments on the A-League Off Air podcast. Stajic called them cowardly to go out in public and talk about that. And I guess it's just adding further fuel to the fire. And, we know that Stajic is on a 1-year contract at the Wanderers. Western Sydney are in a position where if they wanted to get rid of him, they're not in any financial place where that would be an issue to do. So for me, there's only a couple of options, and it's either to start winning games without Mata, or you got to find a way to put him in the team. And, we still haven't quite answered the question of where he'd be best placed in that 11 as well.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty torn beforehand to say, whether Mata would start this game or not. And I think seeing the lineups and Mata starting on the bench was probably an indication from Staj that, this is my team. I'm the coach. I'm going to make the decisions. The board has no influence in this because we've seen in the past few games where we've sort of questioned whether Mata does fit in the system. But in the second half when he came on, I thought he really made the Wanderers a much better side. I thought the game changed, on its head. He was a lot more creative, sort of floated, in and around sort of the midfield in front of the back four a bit as well. A position where we sort of been crying out for to test him to see whether it could work. And it did when he came on in that second half in around the 60th minute mark. I thought, he provided a lot of life, a lot of spark, creativity. And that's just a piece of what the Wanderers have been missing this season in midfield, the likes of Josh Brillante, in there this season where, I know he's sort of a similar player to Mata in terms of, the engine and the lack of pace, but in terms of the vision and stuff and the creativity, all that stuff. I know Jacob was going to say, is he similar to Mata?
Well, that's ambitious.
No, I was getting there. But no, I think definitely, moving forward, I think Stage definitely now has a big decision to make considering that performance as he came on, because if he keeps benching him, and Mata's coming on and producing performances like that, then you start to question Stajic and what he's actually seeing on the field and his tactical approach. And it's one of those situations where, yes, he is on a 1-year contract, but at the same time, you've got a player like Mata, they don't come around, so often. Do you just sort of try and adapt your system and play him in a more sort of even a defensive midfield position even, perhaps? I think it's something definitely to consider for Staj.
This is a discussion we had on Sunday, right, Lockie? It's like, surely with a player like Juan Mata, you find a way to get him the minutes. You look at the example of McCarthy with Valencia, man. Like, he's the best player in the team. He starts. Like, it just seems a little bit strange that, okay, yes, it might not have been Stagic's decision to bring Mata into the club, but he is arguably the best player in the team. there's got to be a way of getting him in there and getting him minutes. And we saw the impact that he can have. You mentioned Christian. Once he came onto the pitch, things did start to change for the Wanderers. And he obviously got that assist as well for the Wanderers' second goal, which I mentioned at the time, we could be in for a fun final 10 minutes. And then only a couple of minutes later, Sydney scored and that was pretty much game over. But, it was that change. It was bringing a player of Matt's quality onto the pitch that made the difference for the Wanderers. So, yeah, you've got to be asking that question. Like, surely there is something that they can do to get him into this side where he's going to have an impact, not just sticking with the same old system and playing him out of position because, you're going to stick with your plan A, but just be smart about it. Yeah. Like, MacArthur have built a team around, previously it was Davila and Germain. Now it's just Germain, but he's the focal point of the side. It's the same with most clubs in the A-League, right? Is you have that one really talented attacking outlet, and that's what you build your in possession football around. So yeah, it does seem a bit strange that the Wanderers almost sort of are doing the opposite of that, and that Mata, he's not getting the minutes, but he's put in a performance here that suggests that he probably should be getting them.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the Unite round in a little bit more general context. One interesting idea that Jaiden brought up in an interview there was, the concept of moving Unite round around the country to different states. Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane. You can move it around depending on facilities. I know it would work better in different places. I even saw thrown around the idea of Western United get their stadium built. Or then you've got the training facility that we know can put together. Maybe you play the women's games there and the men's games at the stadium. So there is different options. But the key point of discussion here, as I mentioned at the top, Christian, is that we understand that the contract is now over. The contract that was originally for the grand final is now being transferred into Unite round. That has been fulfilled. So where do we go from here? Do we want to keep going with Unite round? Do we want to leave it as it is and say, we had to do it, and we gave it a fair shakedown specifically this year? There was enough planning time where the APL could put some resources into it and see what a really, properly resourced Unite round would look like. And then, the decision is, do we put it out to tender again? Do we go back to Sydney? Do we go back to somewhere else? There's about 4 or 5 questions I've just kind of thrown at you there.
Yeah, which one do I answer first? Sunday night, I thought, I was sort of a bit torn. I was like, probably my initial reaction was probably scrap Unite round because the league's probably not in a position where we're ready to have that sort of thing in terms of attracting the crowds. And, something like AFL, for example, they base it around a community aspect where you've got these community ovals in Adelaide where, it's just a real feel-good vibe. Whereas we're watching on TV, which I was all weekend, as you know, it made for a bad product. And we mentioned the Suncorp Stadium during the season when Brisbane, the empty seats and how it went from a viewer's perspective, that didn't look great. And, but then I saw a tweet as well today saying it would be a silly idea to scrap it because it is a great initiative. And I do agree with that. It's just finding different ways to help improve it and, make it better. And that's the real question. How do you go about that? I think, to Jaiden's point about switching, from states each year, yes, but is that really going to help, the root cause of the root problem, I should say, of, attracting the crowds and making, filling the stadiums? I'm not too sure. Maybe you played in smaller stadiums. To my point last week, maybe you don't schedule a Sydney derby if it's based in Sydney because, yes, you attract 30,000. It was a great spectacle, but then you've got the other games where you've got interstate clubs and, for the product itself without, a certain number of fans attending. It was like 2,000-3,000 per game, if I'm not mistaken. For some, it's, you sort of got to try and balance it out a bit. So that's, I guess, one suggestion. And then you've got fixtures, like I mentioned last week, Victor and Adelaide, for example. Jacob disagreed because he said the rivalry wouldn't be the same, which again, I agreed to that. But at the same time, perhaps it's a fixture like that, which, would probably maybe attract a few more thousand people to say, okay, this has been such a famous fixture, since the inception of the league. Maybe, we want to attend this game. Whereas, I don't know, for example, Western United, Perth Glory, like no one really is going to be interested in that from, besides Western and Perth fans who most of them aren't even going to travel anyway. So it's different stuff like that where the APL has to sort of weigh up and determine, okay, how do we go about it for next season if we do want to go ahead with it? There's a lot of stuff that needs to be planned out, I think.
It's an interesting point you bring up, actually, because obviously there's different parties here that benefit from different things, and I imagine the APL want to obviously get bums on seats and get people in the games. But as you say, if you're gonna, let's imagine we play it in Brisbane, right? Let's just, and for the sake of argument, imagine we have stadiums that are well suited to fit in a good capacity crowd, right? If you're going to then maybe you put the third Sydney derby of the year there, you put the third Melbourne derby or the third F3, and you have those big marquee fixtures, well, then you're actually probably going to get a lot more people traveling. You're not going to have as many local people turn up to games, probably, but you're going to incentivize, the Melbourne supporters and the Sydney supporters to get up there, which is probably what the tourism boards at the local state level are going to be looking for, right? And hopefully, in turn, that's a bigger contract for the APL. So are we perhaps looking at it the other way around? It's a bit of a long bow to draw, Jacob, because 30,000 at the Sydney Derby was great. But maybe it's the people travelling that is really going to push this idea forwards.
Yeah, but that requires people to travel, and that's one of the big problems that I can see with this concept is it's not cheap to travel anymore. Gone are the days of a $50 flight on Tiger Air, right? Like it's like for me, flights
or Bonza,
or Bonza, yeah. But it's like flights are not cheap anymore, and there's not generally many other good forms of transport. I mean, drives can take ages for a lot of people. There's not really any good there's no high-speed rail in Australia, so a train trip is expensive and it takes forever. So it's just like there's not really a good way of getting around this country, which is unfortunate, because I think there would be a lot more people that would travel if these distances were closer, if the prices weren't so high. That's a big part of, and that's why sort of Australian football has this unique culture in a way where these big full away bays and traveling fans and things like you see in Europe or South America or wherever, like you don't get that as much here, and it's a sort of different atmosphere at games, right? But I think if the country were smaller, let's just say hypothetically, we just cut out. I mean, nobody lives in 90% of it, right? So like we just cut all that out and mesh it all together. People would travel more because it would be quicker, cheaper, easier to do. So I think that's a big part of it is the travel, right? It's you do have to actually travel to these games to go and do it, and it's usually not cheap. If you want to go to all the games, you've got to take a day off work or whatever. So, that was the thing. I almost didn't go because I might not have been able to get the weekend off work or whatever. So it's not easy for people to travel around the country. That's one of the things. Another thing, obviously, is football culture. Now, I know I just mentioned that it does have a little bit of a different feeling here in Australia, but it's still a case of football is a very tribal sport. Your fan bases you're supporting your club. The dub, it's a little bit different. You do have fans of the league, fans of players and things like that. And it's a bit more, there's more sort of cohesion and coexisting there within the fan base. But especially on the men's side of things, it is this very tribal thing. We obviously saw that with the Sydney Derby. That's what makes it so great, right? There's this clear divide between the two fan bases. Wanderers fans aren't going to turn up for a Sydney FC game that isn't a derby. So, that's still the reality of football. And as much as you can want people to embrace it, and I mean, it was great fun at Unite Round. Like, there were Perth fans in the Adelaide away bay. There were Phoenix fans who joined up with the Bulls to, root against Auckland. Like, it was awesome to have that. But for the majority of football fans, that's not the case. They're not going to engage with that sort of thing. I think it's a very niche audience that actually will engage with this. So that's problem number 2. And then, problem number 3 is location, right? And that's sort of what we've just spoken about is perhaps it's a case of you just got to move it somewhere smaller. Sydney is a huge city, and Allianz is, look, it's not an enormous stadium, but by A-League standards, it's one of the biggest. And, you only get the one game there that's going to fill it up or even look half full. If you do move it, I think you've got to move it somewhere where it's smaller. So Unite Round is an event. It's something for people to go to. Sydney, there's always stuff going on. Unite Round is a blip on the radar comparatively. There's always other things to be doing. They're not going to mark out on the calendar as, this is a big event this week. Like, Lockie driving around Sydney, there was really very little indication until you got near the stadium that there was even anything on. It just wasn't an event for Sydney. Whereas I think for perhaps smaller cities or other locations around Australia, it could be that, right? It could be this sort of thing that they all sort of build around and it becomes an event for them. So I think that's sort of three things that I noticed from it, where I was like, these are sort of sticking points here. It's the travel, it's the nature of football fans, and I think the location as well all sort of played into it. Because yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the intro, Lockie, everyone that went there seemed to have a fantastic time, right? It was really good fun, great atmosphere. It was awesome to meet so many people that, you know, we've spoken to online, or, you know, that we interact with all the time, but you'd never meet face to face. And then you get the chance to do that, and it's awesome, and you get to have a lot of fun. So perhaps it's, you know, pivoting towards trying to sell that point of it, right? It's about creating new friendships, meeting people, and having fun. And I think to do that, you do have to, perhaps move it away from Sydney, or you know, have it a destination to go to. Like I've seen people suggest the Gold Coast, right? Like people will holiday in the Gold Coast anyway, you know, and then if there's football on, well, that's even better. So, you know, it's those things like that. I think that there are tweaks that could be made to make it better for sure. But by all accounts, it was better this year than it was last. Well, it was still the same year last season. Just about the same year. But yeah, last season is an improvement on that. But yeah, whether or not it continues, I don't know, because like you said, Lockie, the APL need to get bums on seats to justify it, and well, not the APL don't need to justify it. It's what they need to be able to justify it to the governments that are going to want to pitch in for it. So yeah, it's a tough spot to be in, I think. But I enjoyed it, but yeah, whether or not it's going to be back, I'm not quite sure.
I think the key point here is that Unite Round at its full potential, if you can have appropriate stadiums. And I actually don't believe that playing every game from the men's at one stadium and every game from the women's at one stadium is the answer. You know, if you have the marquee fixture, like the Sydney Derby, we'll talk about the F3 in a little bit, because obviously that got significantly less crowds. You have to have a city that works well for it. I understand that's not something that you can just whip up at the tip of a hat, but having appropriate stadiums and making sure that you can fill them out. And again, this is not a new issue at all in Australian football. I think it has potential to work at its best point, but it's just, how long does it take to get there? How much money does it cost the APL? I'm like, I don't know. Does the agreement actually allow them to make profit on a weekend like this? Does the rent for stadiums and stuff like that come into it? I'm not sure. So maybe it's a situation where it goes away for 10 years. And if we're going to have 10 years of consistent growth in the A-League and the hype builds up again, and we think, oh, actually, I remember I had a really good time in Unite around 10 years ago, and then there's more hype for bringing it back, right? So maybe doing it like that is better than just a little bit of incremental growth.
You know what that reminds me of is something that Max Rushton said to us, right? Because we had a chat with him, and he was like, what does the A-League need to solve all these issues? 100 years of history. Give it 100 years.
Need to wait.
And all of these little things that everybody builds up into these big issues, they don't mean anything by that point in time, right? Like, so perhaps it is a case, Lockie, you do need to go, right, okay, we know kind of what works and what doesn't and what we need to improve on, but we need to give it some time before it's going to be effective again.
All right. And then one more question on this, and we'll use this to transition in as well. Should the F3, if it was the exact same round played next year, should we have the F3 in Unite rounds? And then I think the other question is, if we're going to have it, should it be on the Friday night, Christian, right? Because we didn't get a very big crowd at all. You know, having it in the Friday night, it's very difficult for the fans, especially who would probably want to travel in one day. Like, the coast is close enough for like a day trip. You probably wouldn't want to spend the night if you could get away with it. So then having to do that whole thing in one day becomes a little bit too much. I've seen plenty of people talk about the idea of having it on the Saturday, because then you're really getting the hype. You know, the whole day of travel becomes a lot more appealing. Maybe you don't have to, you know, shave a couple of hours off work on Friday afternoon to get there in time. Maybe that scheduling decision, you know, it makes a little bit more sense. And then there's the conversation, as we were talking about before, do we have derbies in Unite round? Maybe is the Sydney Derby enough by itself?
Yeah, perhaps. I think the Friday discussion is the big one, isn't it? I don't agree that with Friday putting in that time slot, because probably a bit better maybe to put it on the Saturday, maybe even early afternoon before the Sydney Derby, to build that bit of hype up towards that main fixture of the round, let's be honest, which it was. But I think at the end of the day, like, I'm sort of skeptical with one derby being played in Unite round, let alone two. So for me, I think probably save it for another round. And, but even so, I expected a bigger crowd, even if it was a Friday night, just because, obviously still two, New South Wales based clubs. Yeah, it was a bit disappointing from that aspect, but definitely, again, something for the APL to reconsider and suggest, okay, is it really worth it? And number two, in terms of the scheduling, in which day do we sort of organize everything? How do we go about it as well? Because I think that's really crucial to, attracting fans and, I guess, maintain that great spectacle. Because if you're going to schedule on a Friday and, like you said, Lockie, fans traveling late from work and trying to get to the ground, it can be a real hassle. So you probably save those fixtures for a Saturday night. If you're going to have one derby, either choose the F3 or the Sydney derby if you're going to do it like that. Otherwise, anything else, I think it won't work.
If Unite round was the one extra round and you could either have 3 F3 derbies or just leave it at 2, would you have it?
Tough question. I'd probably I don't know, three derbies I'd have in the season.
You'd have it in.
I'd have 3, yeah.
Okay.
It's a tough one.
It's a fascinating balance. And Jaiden talked about this as well. Like I asked him, traditional football logic usually says a league is that you play each team once, home and away. We've never really had that in the A-League, so why not embrace a little bit
it's
of...
not really our tradition anyway. So
yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Not at least at the A-League level. But let's talk about the game itself in the F3, Jacob. Whether we see another one next year will be an interesting question at Unite rounds, but we have to deal with this one first. A first win of the season for the Central Coast Mariners and a loss for the Newcastle Jets, which paved the way for some interesting comments from Robbie Stanton. Typically a pretty honest guy when it comes to these press conferences. How did you read these comments? Is it just him speaking his mind a little bit and venting some frustrations, or is there a little more to that?
It does feel like there was more to it. And I mean, being there in person, obviously, you couldn't help feeling a little bit sorry for him in a way. Like, it was, the way it just immediately responding, keeps me up at night. Like, that's not just going, oh, I'm frustrated by the fact we're not getting results. Or like, if you're frustrated about not getting results, you can just say that. Like, it's clear to me that, this is something that's really getting to him. And it sucks to see, because like you said, he's such an honest guy all the time. And, it's just, it was a bit of a surprise, honestly, to see these sort of comments being made. And then, we sort of remarked at the lack of any real, body response from the Jets media manager there in the press conference room, just sort of letting Stanton just have free reign of what he needed to say. And obviously the Stajic presser wasn't the only interesting one to come from Unite round. We had a few where it was like the coaches just speaking their mind. And I do appreciate the fact that he was so open about things, because we're often, or at least we're starting to now, talk about the mental side of the game for players. And we've actually just seen Mary Fowler out of the Matilda squad for mental health reasons to work on that. And we're starting to talk about it for players, but obviously it's the same thing for coaches as well. They're still human at the end of the day. And whether or not it's true that he's on the chopping block, I mean, you look at the results would suggest that he probably is. And he himself said he didn't know, right? That's the telling thing, is he was so honest throughout the rest of what he was saying, to then say, I don't know how much longer I've got. It sort of suggests that, even he's not sure if the board is and the club is going to stick with him, or if they've had enough and they're going to get rid of him. But it's like he said, he's going to keep doing this because it's what he loves. And I really respect that. But, the other comment he made about the experienced players, that was a pretty underhanded jab as well towards the board, going, look, we've not got enough quality here in terms of experienced players. And we did sort of, chuckle a little bit about the fact that he was using Sushnaya as the example of, we need experienced players like Sushnaya, but that's the experienced player he's got in the squad. There is nobody else. So it's I did it in the moment feel quite bad for him, because he's trying to make do with what he's got there in the squad. And it just seems like he's not getting that support, and he needed to get it off his chest quite clearly, because it was, it was a pretty long answer that he he gave there. And if memory serves, it was, Christian was halfway through asking a question when he just jumped into it. So, it was clearly something that was at the front of his mind, and he was like, I just need to say something and get it out there. But yeah, I mean, definitely one of the coaches now that all eyes are going to be on him and his performances moving forwards, because it seems pretty clear that even he's starting to doubt whether or not he's going to be in the job much longer.
And Christian, it seems obvious, right, that he's been dealt a little bit of a tough hand, right? Like, he came into this game with essentially not a recognised striker. Lachie Bayliss did a job, looked a lot better when the substitution was made. He went into those kind of tight areas, which created the goal, and that was the best move of the match for me. And I thought maybe even the Jets potentially marginally the better team. You score a goal and then it's disappointing to concede one almost straight away. Caltac header. And then, unfortunate to concede the second one a few minutes after that as well. It just feels like it's really tough to do much more in Robbie Stanton's situation. Obviously, with the ownership situation, those things aren't going to resolve football issues in such a short amount of time. They need room to breathe, room to grow. But coaches aren't often afforded that luxury.
I reckon arguably you could probably chuck in Giancarlo Italiano to coach the Jets, and even he would struggle, honestly, because at the end of the day, you need the players, you need an identity, because if you don't have any of that, you can see on the pitch where they're struggling a bit, right? In the off-season, they signed Eli Adams from Victory, and, although he's a bright young prospect, it's sort of one of those signings where, okay, we're just going to pick him and see, okay, what can we make of him, and he has, shown signs of promise, and a few other players in that squad as well. But when you're sort of having to, getting dealt with those cards and having to sort of, coach from that perspective, it can be very difficult. And it can only do so much, like you said, Lockie. So you can tell in the post-match press conference, obviously very frustrated. I think he used that platform as an opportunity to vent his frustration directly at the board to say, okay, I want to see some change, at the top in terms of the decision making, and perhaps he might not be having much of a say as he would like to, in terms of maybe some decision making or other aspects. I'm not too sure, but yeah, it definitely is. Again, we sit here and we say it's a prickly situation at Newcastle, despite all the stuff that's happened with the ownership. We thought, okay, resolved. It's going to be sort of a new chapter, but here we are again. It's sort of the same old story, really. I think once they pat down a real clear path and identity, you just sort of see the same cycle, unfortunately.
All right. Well, of course, our first win for the Mariners as well in the league. Their first win in their treble-winning season last time around was also in the fifth round in an F3 derby against the Jets. So a little bit of symmetry in it for you there. Look, it's really hard to gauge. I don't think there was massive signs of improvements from the Mariners in this game, but a win is a win, and you never know what that can do for a team's mentality. We're going to have an opportunity to tackle them more in a little bit more depth on Friday, because they have an Asian Champions League game coming up this week against Vissel Kobe, which is in Japan as well. So that's going to be a tough game for them, but we'll talk about them on Friday. Of course, another key storyline, Jacob, the Kiwi teams still on top, 1 and 2. Auckland, I believe, now become the first A-League team to win, at least in the A-League men's, to win 4 games in a row, which is incredible for them. Still haven't conceded a goal, which is even more remarkable. And then the Phoenix getting the win over a Melbourne Victory side. They've now beaten both the champions and the runners-up in consecutive weeks, in what most people consider to be a weakened squad from last year. But you talked about coaches being open and pressers. Italiano talked at length about the tactical versatility and his thought process throughout the game, and it really did it felt like he outcoached Patrick Uznorbo in that game as well.
Yeah, it was funny, wasn't it? Because PK was asked, what are your thoughts on the game? He's like, if you're disappointed, obviously, because we dominated. And then that question was flipped as well to Italiano and said, PK reckons that Victory dominated the game. What's your take on that? And he was like, depends what you think of domination as. He's like, because, and then, obviously went on in depth about the tactical stuff, but the main idea was, we made Victory feel like they were on top, but actually they were just playing into the trap that we'd set for them, where they were going to, get overconfident and we'd be able to hit them where they're weakest. Such fascinating insight from him, and it's fantastic to see that from a coach, especially at this level. Just such a class act as well, going around shaking absolutely everybody's hand that was in that room. Cameraman, it was awesome. Really great guy. But yeah, in terms of the game itself, Wellington, they're just, they are one of the best teams in the league. And these sort of performances show that, right? They're away from home, playing a home game against a really strong side. The turnout was awful, but I think Wellington fans probably outnumbered Victory fans about 3-1.
Sorry, I jumped in a bit early there. Maybe not 3-1.
Maybe not 3-1, but they definitely outnumbered the Victory fans, and that's something that Chiefy touched on as well. The support that Wellington do have, even in Australia, is immense, and that how much that means to the players to know that they've got that backing wherever they play. And they showed it in this game because, it was always going to be a tight affair. And I think both of these games involving the New Zealand teams, we were like, these are probably going to be the two most likely to go for draws in the whole round. And we sort of saw why, because, it's obviously a lot of travel for these guys, but they're still the best squads or the best teams, rather, in the competition. So they're going to want to grind out a result as best as they can. And, Victory, they had some good passages of play. It just felt like there was something missing up front. Obviously, Fornaroli came on and had that chance from the free kick, which forced a good save out of Oluwayemi. But before that, there wasn't a huge amount. Arzani was doing decent work in the half space. But again, as has been the case for a long time with Arzani, it was just that final ball or that final shot that was missing that he couldn't quite get. I thought Mishash had a very quiet game, and he's had quite a quiet season as well. It seems like defenders have sort of wised up to the fact that he's going to be quite physical, whereas historically in the A-League, it's the attacking players that are the technical, tricky guys, and the defenders are the physical ones. Mishash sort of came in, shook that up a bit. I was like, no, I'm going to go toe to toe with you and beat you in these duels. But defenders have wised up to that, and they're going in even stronger and harder against him. And he's not quite having as much success as he had last season. But, I think it just goes to show how good the Phoenix are that they were able to get the result there. And then likewise with Auckland, they've not conceded a goal. Like, that is an absurd stat 5 rounds into the season. Not one.
4 games, so how to buy.
Well, yeah, 5 rounds in 4 games. Even 4 games without a goal is an insane statistic. And it's all down to, and it's something that I've spoken about before, the balance of the squad that they've got. You can't look on the pitch and point out and go, this is a weak spot for them. It seems like they're just so well-rounded everywhere, in defence especially, and that's why they've got such a good record defensively. Obviously Alex Paulson between the sticks, but then a backline, Dan Hall's been fantastic. De Vries has been an amazing signing as well for them. It's just such a great squad that they've been able to build, that Corica's been able to build there with Auckland, and they're playing some solid football that's getting them these results. And now it's these 2 New Zealand teams that are flying high in the A-League. People going, does the A-League stand for Australia or what's it stand for now? Because it's the teams from overseas that are doing so well here. But I mean, it's credit where credit's due, because they've been fantastic so far. Obviously with Wellington, it's with Chiefy and his tactics and his adjustability and his ability to be able to make changes during games. And with Auckland, it's that squad building where they've just done such a good job of making sure there's no real weaknesses that teams can exploit, and then going forwards from that, just backing themselves in performances. So they weren't the high scoring games of the weekend, but I think those are the ones that these teams are going to look back on, Auckland and Wellington at the back end of the season, and go, that's such a huge result for us. Traveling down to Unite Round to get those wins over. Look, MacArthur and Victory are both very, very good teams this season. And they were able to get those wins. So, huge for them. Perhaps not too surprising, in general sense of they were probably the better teams, but surprising in the fact that it did seem quite comprehensive. It didn't seem like either team was really struggling too much, even with, the travel and the opposition that they had. So, no, very impressive results.
Christian, I want to ask you about Italiano because I feel like he brings up this massive contradiction in Australian football at the moment because we praise Ange Postecoglou all the time. He's been doing amazing things for Australian football on the world scale. Of course, 4-0 against Manchester City in the Premier League the other day, which was a wild score to wake up to. But his whole mantra of his one way of playing and never back down and never change for the opponent and play our style of football. Whereas, Italiano, and I'll throw Mark Jackson in there as well for what he did with the Mariners last season, those two teams finishing towards the top of the tree. We've been praising them for their versatility and being able to adapt in games and change formations, change personnel and tweak things around. And that's been the successful formula in the A-League. And I don't really know how those two things can mesh together that well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I guess every coach has their own philosophy, right? I mean, you've got Ange Postecoglou, for example, and it's his way or the highway, right? Whereas you've got someone like Italiano, and he's got so many different variations, so many different tactics where he can tweak. And he mentioned that in the press conference that you guys were at. It must have been, really interesting to see how much he sort of delved into that side of the game and how honest and open he was. But he's also mentioned even last season the travel aspect and this game traveling to Unite round. Obviously, Jacob mentioned there that it seemed like Wellington and Auckland didn't struggle, but for Italiano, to sort of have that sort of defensive structure, they didn't really struggle because in terms of being tired, it wasn't really an issue because the way they were set up, they were able to soak a bit of pressure, and then they just picked their moments so well, and that's what I find so great about this Wellington Phoenix side, even from last season, even at home where they sort of try and push numbers a bit more forward, but it's still a cautious approach at the same time. It's just that really fine balance, whereas a coach like Ange will sort of go all out, play that high line. It's just a really sort of fascinating, tactical sort of battle sometimes. And again, it goes back to that philosophy of what works well for a particular coach. And Italiano obviously has the trust of his players. They buy into the project. And he mentioned at the end of that long answer that Jacob was referring to, if the players aren't buying into it, then you can have all the tactics in the world. You can have the best coach, but at the end of the day, if the players aren't willing to run and fight and be willing to adapt to those tactical changes, then there's no point in doing it in the first place. So it's all a combination of things, and you can tell that the team are really glued together. And I think again it will take them a long way this season.
And then two teams that keep on falling down the ladder. Obviously, their positions remain the same, but in terms of their gap to the teams above, Perth Glory and Brisbane Roar, Jacob, both fell to Adelaide United and Western United. I think I've got those the wrong way around, but I'm sure people know the pictures. I had a lot of hope for Brisbane, as going into this game. I thought they played well in the first half and they adapted well to what was a different shape from Adelaide in this game. And then when the Reds reverted in the second half, Brisbane really struggled to respond to the kind of increased intensity that was put into the game. And then from Perth, even scoring the first goal, it was looking up for them. But Western United came back and particularly the young players of Noah Botic and Dylan Leonard really stood out for them and brought Western a win in Unite rounds. And then for Adelaide as well, I've been critical of their performances despite sitting undefeated. Now they are the only team that is undefeated apart from Auckland. So it's been a good start for the season for them.
Yeah. Let's start with that Western and Perth game, right? What is going on with Perth? Obviously we know that they're not good, but Western haven't been exactly, high flyers this season either. And, Perth get that opening goal and still can't even get a result out of it. It's a bit disappointing, but I mean, you mentioned him, Dylan Leonard, right? What a player he seems to be. And Western is something that I sort of noticed heading into this season was they don't have, we spoke about the Jets not having a lot of experienced players. Western are in exactly the same boat. It's like their midfield unit, the oldest player is like 24 years old. The defensive unit is pretty similar. Probably Ben Garucci, what about 29, 30 is probably the oldest player they've got defensively. Hiroshi Ibasuki up front, the oldest overall, I believe, 34, 35. So it's a very, very young squad, but they're making do with it, and it's giving these players a chance to perform at this level. Obviously, yeah, you mentioned Noah Botic and the fact that we've sort of known and heard his name for a while now, but we're starting to really see him getting those minutes. That was a criticism of Aloisi last season, was why aren't you playing some of the youngsters a bit more? He's doing it now, and they're looking to actually be sort of reaping what they sow and getting some results. So, it's good stuff for Western, but yeah, Perth still continuing to struggle. And I mean, we weren't in the post-match presser for that one, but by all accounts, Strilic was of the impression that his team played a lot better than what appeared to be the case. I know a couple saying, were we watching the same game there? Because it did seem like he perhaps has a much higher opinion of their performance than most onlookers had. But yeah, for Perth, it's been an awful season, but not as awful as it's been, as you mentioned, Lockie, for the Raw, who somehow find themselves below Perth on the table. And it was quite funny, actually, in the crowd for the Brisbane Adelaide game, and there were some Perth fans chanting when Adelaide went ahead that they're not bottom anymore, and I was like, that's pretty good. But yeah, Brisbane, it's again a case of, I think, missed opportunities for Brisbane. That you said, that first half they were completely dominant. Adelaide, changed their shape, went to a more conventional 4-3-3, and it was sort of a reflection of what their youth sides have been trying to do at Adelaide, right, in playing 4-3-3 possession-based football, which is very distinct to the identity that the team has had, where it's very transitional with a lot of wing play, using Dylan Piraeus in that sort of width-holding role that they've had this season, is very at odds to what the youth team is being taught. And so I think, perhaps there's an element here of let's try and unify things and see if it'll work. And it clearly didn't work in that first half. So they revert back to what they know is going to work and get results, do it in the second half, and Brisbane then don't adjust to that change. And I think that's what killed them there, was they weren't willing to make that adjustment to accommodate for the fact that, hang on, Adelaide are back playing a bit wider, playing more intently, playing a lot quicker on the ball. Something that Carl Viet has mentioned a couple of times this season is key to their success, is passing the ball quickly, moving it quickly, because while they want to control possession, they know that if they move it too slowly, they're not going to have the time to play through, around, or over an opposition defensive block. And that's what they saw in that first half against Brisbane. They come out, play a bit quicker, play a bit wider in the second half, and they find that success literally 40 seconds into the second half. So, Brisbane, it's another case of just not quite there. Another tight loss against a solid team. Obviously, played really well against Sydney, couldn't get the result. Played good in the first half here, couldn't get the result. I'm not quite sure what the problem is. I mean, I do point to the defense. They've conceded a lot of goals this season, and their defense has been quite poor. But I think that we knew that was going to be a problem heading into the season. They had a poor defense last season, and they've replaced it with arguably marginally better players, but from an Adelaide team that was poor defensively last season, so arguably not much of an improvement there. And they've just, it's I think asking too much of the rest of the players to have to score 4-5 goals consistently every game to be able to get these results. So I think they do need to tighten up the back line a bit more and stop conceding goals. They were very open in the second half, and I think Adelaide probably could have had 2 or 3 more if the finishing was better. I know Falami had a couple of chances. Johnny Yole had one that from about 8 yards out, I'm not quite sure how he put it wide. So it could have been a much uglier scoreline for the Raw, and I think the fact that they had such a strong start probably makes the scoreline look a bit better for them than arguably their performance was. And they find themselves at the bottom of the table now with a lot of work left to do, because there are teams above them that are arguably worse teams, but they're yet to play them, and they've not got the results, even when they have played well against better teams. So, it's a tough spot to be in for Brisbane. And I know a lot of their fans are already starting to get a bit disgruntled with Ruben Zadkovic. And again, we just spoke about, the idea of having a coach who can adjust versus a coach who loves his plan A, and they're going, why are you not making these adjustments in games when we start to go behind and what we're doing doesn't work and things like that. So, there's a lot of thinking for the Raw to do, because look, I can see why you do rate them Lockie, because there are moments where they look like a very, very good team, but I think just overall they've not quite got it clicking yet. I'm not sure how long it's going to take them. Because again, it's round 5 now, and the Mariners at least have got their first win on the board. So you're in there with the company of your Perth Glories, who have looked completely hopeless all season long. So a lot of work for the Raw to do.
Look, Zadkovic has made adjustments. For example, Jay O'Shea played in a traditional 10 in this game, where usually he's been part of a double pivot in the 6. In this game, it was Waleed Shaw and Joe Coletti. I think it'd be nice to know, but I wonder if, they've always wanted Jay O'Shea to be on the ball higher up the field, but now, Zadkovic feels like he can put more trust in specifically Waleed Shaw to be the guy that drops between the centre backs and kind of becomes a pseudo back 3 and operates in that deep part of the field as that, that quarterback kind of role. Luke Braden is the obvious example in the A-League. Keegan Yelich moved out from the left to the right wing today. He rotated a little bit, but his goal was exceptional to start off, which actually did come off the left, to be fair.
Yeah.
So there are signs of life all over the place for the Raw. I think they will be competitive for the finals at the season's end, but obviously not a very good start for them, Christian. And then for Western United's point of view, Dylan Leonard, who, as we say, got the opening goal and looked impressive, but unfortunately he's going to miss next week because he got sent off towards the end of it.
Yeah, so Leonard was the youngest ever goal scorer for the club, 17 years old, and then also became the youngest player in the competition to score and get sent off in the same game. That is absolutely crazy. But I guess I put the red card to one side. I guess I'll put that down to a bit of an experience. But, to score that goal, obviously at such a young age, it just shows how much youth and trust that John Aloisi is putting into this side. They're obviously looking long-term into the future, and I actually don't see this season as bleak as maybe would have thought previously. I forgot where I put them, maybe second last in my predictions, but they might finish in and around maybe the bottom 4. But I think in terms of the performances, it's not going to be as bad as last season. There's going to be a lot of young blood in there. We're seeing the likes of Noah Botic again, really step up to the plate, really contribute a lot. And, when you've got such a young side, you need the experience as well. And Ben Garuccio, I thought, has played well the past couple of games and, obviously, leading in that defense. So, yeah, they've got a few leaders as well to just accompany this young core coming up. And I really do honestly believe that in the next couple of years, they really could be a big threat if they can keep, their core together, keep developing these young players and really start to create a system for them to thrive. I think, exciting times ahead for the club, but, just a bit of patience is needed for the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, their academy is often talked about as one that is chock-loaded with talent compared to the others around the country. So, Western United, it's all about that stadium, right? 2 years, season 0 almost, it feels like it will be over. And again, you've got to have a lot of good young talent coming through. So the future is definitely one that is looking up for Western United. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. We thank you all for joining us. It was good to meet a couple of people over at Unite Rounds. We appreciate that. And we've got some more content coming out as well. Of course, we were part of the creator match. We did the Max Rushton Soccer AM Top Pins Challenge, so that'll come out soon as well. A little bit of fun over on YouTube. But Jacob Stevens, thank you for tonight, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good being back on this. Jeez, you can tell how tired I am. I'm having a stinker here at the back end of this. It's been a long day and it's been a long weekend, but it was good fun. And back to the usual now. Back to reality. Back to normality with just regular A-League stuff. But no, it was good fun while it lasted.
It was. Christian Montegan, thank you as well, mate.
Always good to chat.
All right, we will be back on Friday. We've got some AFC games coming up this week. The Mariners and Sydney FC in action, and then a look ahead to round 6 of the A-League men's competition. We'll see you then. Goodbye.